The air in the terminal was thick with the scent of stale coffee, cleaning fluid, and the low-grade hum of human anxiety. It was a smell I knew well. A smell that always meant I was on my way home. For most people, home was the place they were leaving. For me, it was the place I was so desperately trying to get to. My worn backpack felt heavy on my shoulders, not just with the few clothes and supplies I'd packed, but with the weight of a 6-week fundraising trip that had left me bone-weary and hollowed out. My destination wasn't a vacation spot. It was Serenia, a small, dusty nation in a corner of the world most maps barely bothered to detail. To the airline, it was just another 3-letter airport code. To me, it was the place where my life had found its meaning. It was the sound of children's laughter echoing across a sun-baked courtyard, the taste of Kale's strong, sweet tea, and the feeling of little hands slipping into mine. It was home, inside my bag, nestled carefully between a spare t-shirt and a medical kit was a small wooden music box. It was for Leela. She was turning 7, and I had promised her I wouldn't miss it. I had promised her a gift that played a song as pretty as the river. It took me 3 weeks to find the right one. A simple, unadorned box that tinkled out a gentle, hopeful melody. That little box was my anchor, the physical manifestation of a promise I intended to keep. The boarding line snaked endlessly, a shuffling, tired caterpillar of humanity. I watched a gate agent, a man whose name tag read Mr. Henderson. He had a pinched, sour look on his face as if he'd been sucking on a lemon all morning. He moved with a kind of aggressive weariness, snapping at passengers, snatching passports, his voice a flat, monotonous bark. I felt a familiar knot of unease tighten in my stomach. I've dealt with men like him before, men who wield their small sliver of power like a weapon. All I wanted was to be invisible, to get my stamp, and to step onto that plane. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, my gaze drifting to the large windows overlooking the tarmac. The plane sat there, a beautiful silver promise of reunion. I could almost feel the warm, dry air of Serenia on my skin, hear the chorus of Elara. Elara is back. That would greet me. A faint smile touched my lips. 6 weeks of sterile hotel rooms, forced smiles at donor dinners, and endless PowerPoints about funding gaps would melt away the moment I stepped off that plane. Finally, it was my turn. I approached a podium, offering a small, tired smile. "Good morning," I said, my voice softer than I intended. Mr. Henderson didn't look up. He just stuck out a hand, palm up. "Passport." "Boarding pass." I handed them over. He flicked open the passport, his eyes scanning the photo page with an unnerving intensity. My passport was my life story in stamps and visas. It was worn at the edges, the cover soft and flexible from being shoved into countless pockets and bags. A faint watermark, a ghost of a coffee spill from a chaotic layover in Istanbul 2 years ago, was visible near the bottom of my photo page. It had never been an issue before. He ran his thumb over the spot. "What's this?" he asked, his voice sharp with accusation. "Oh, that's just a bit of water damage from a few years ago. It's been through dozens of airports since then. It's never been a problem," I explained, trying to keep my tone light and unconcerned. He held the passport up to the fluorescent light, tilting it back and forth. "The laminate is peeling." "It's not peeling," I said, leaning forward slightly. "It's just a little worn." He looked at me for the first time, and his eyes were cold and dismissive. They swept over my practical travel clothes, my scuffed hiking boots, and my messy bun of hair. I knew the look. It was a look that had already decided who I was, a scruffy backpacker, a potential problem, not a valued customer. "And where are you going?" he asked, though the destination was clearly printed on the boarding pass in his hand. Serena, I said. He let out a short, derisive huff. Serena, another tourist looking for an authentic experience. Are we going to go build a wall for a week and put it on your social media? The condescension in his voice was a physical blow. It stung, sharp and unfair. All the exhaustion of the past 6 weeks, all the homesickness, all the stress, coalesced into a single point of raw frustration. But I knew anger would get me nowhere. No, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. I live there. I work there. Right, he said, drawing the word out with exaggerated disbelief. He tapped the passport on the counter. This document appears to be tampered with. It's compromised. I can't accept it. My heart plummeted. Tampered? It's not tampered with. It's just used. I travel constantly for my work. Please, I really have to get on this flight. The desperation was starting to leak into my voice. I could hear it. And I knew he could too. It was like blood in the water. Everyone has to get on this flight, miss, he sneered. That's what an airport is for. But they do it with valid travel documents. It is valid, I insisted, my voice rising slightly. My visa is in there. Everything is in order. You can call the embassy. You can check your system. I'm the founder of a children's educational program there. There are people waiting for me. There's a little girl. I stopped myself. He didn't care about a little girl. He didn't care about anything but the rule book he held in his mind. I don't need to call anyone, he said, his voice taking on a tone of finality. He held the passport with 2 hands, his knuckles white. This passport is not fit for travel. As per international aviation regulations, I am obligated to deny you entry to the aircraft. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. No, please, I begged, the word catching in my throat. You don't understand. I have to be on that plane. It's not a vacation. It's my life. It's my home. The people in line behind me were starting to shift uncomfortably. I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of pity and annoyance. I was becoming a scene, the person holding everyone up. I've made my decision, Mr. Henderson said, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, and then he did something I could never have anticipated. With a deliberate, theatrical motion, he took hold of my photo page. I saw his thumb and forefinger pinch the corner. No, I whispered, a breath of disbelief, and he ripped it. The sound was quiet, just a soft tear of paper and plastic, but in the sterile silence of my shock, it was as loud as a gunshot. He tore the corner of the page, right through my photograph and the official watermarks, a jagged, ugly wound in the heart of my identity. He dropped the mutilated booklet onto the counter. There, he said, as if he had solved the problem. Now, it's definitively invalid. You'll need to go to your embassy and get a new one. Next in line. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the ruined passport. My face, the one that proved I was me, was torn in two. All the stamps, all the visas, all the proof of a life lived across borders, rendered meaningless by a single malicious act. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The low hum of the airport faded to a distant roar. The music box. Leela, her 7th birthday. A sob, thick and ragged, escaped my lips. It wasn't a cry of anger, but of pure, unadulterated devastation. The promise I had carried for thousands of miles was broken. The hope that had fueled me through sleepless nights and lonely dinners evaporated. It all came crashing down in that one small, violent tear. I reached out a trembling hand and touched a ripped page. My whole world had just been torn apart by a man I didn't know, for a reason I couldn't comprehend. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. They weren't delicate, silent tears. They were the ugly, wrenching sobs of a heart breaking. I slid my backpack off my shoulders, letting it fall to the floor with a dull thud. I leaned against the counter, my body shaking, the ripped passport a symbol of my complete and utter failure. "Ma'am, you're holding up the line," Mr. Henderson said, his voice impatient, devoid of any remorse. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The sounds of my own grief were too loud. From somewhere behind me, a woman's voice cut through the haze. "For God's sake, John, what did you do?" A woman in a crisp airline uniform, her name tag identifying her as Miss Albright, supervisor, was striding towards the podium. Her face was a storm cloud of controlled fury. Mr. Henderson's smug composure seemed to falter for the first time. The passenger's document was compromised, he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "I was following protocol. Protocol does not involve destroying a person's passport," she snapped. She looked from his pale face to my tear-streaked one. Her expression softened instantly. "Ma'am," she said, her voice gentle. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" It took me a moment to find my voice. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, smearing dirt and tears across my face. I felt small and broken. But then I looked at the ripped passport, and a different feeling began to smolder beneath the grief. It was a quiet, fierce resolve. He had taken my document. He had taken my flight. He would not take my story. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I looked past Miss Albright, past Mr. Henderson, to the faces in the line. They were all watching, no longer annoyed, but captivated. I was no longer just an anonymous, sobbing woman. I was a story they were waiting to hear. "My name is Ilara Vance," I began, my voice hoarse but clear. "And that man," I said, pointing a shaking finger at Mr. Henderson, "didn't just rip a piece of paper." I looked directly at Miss Albright, my eyes pleading with her to understand. "For the last 8 years, my home has been a village called Myron, in the northern province of Serenia. It's not on any tourist map. There are no hotels. There's no infinity pool. There is red dust, and a well that sometimes runs dry, and a sky so full of stars at night it makes you feel like you could fall right into it." I paused, gathering my thoughts, letting the story settle in the air. When I first arrived, there was no school. The children spent their days working in the fields or caring for younger siblings. Their parents loved them, but they didn't know a different life was possible. So, with the help of the village elders, I started a school. We started in the shade of a big acacia tree with a single chalkboard and 23 students. We called it the Sunstone Collective, because the children, to me, are as precious as sunlight. I glanced down at my ruined passport. This document, this worn-out little book, is the only reason the Sunstone Collective exists. Every stamp in here from a first-world country represents a fundraising trip like this one. It represents late nights writing grant proposals, smiling at donors, and explaining over and over again why a girl in Myron deserves to learn how to read just as much as a girl in London or New York. This trip, my voice cracked, this trip paid for our new classroom. It paid for textbooks and a new water pump so the girls don't have to spend their mornings hauling water instead of learning fractions. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the small wooden music box. I held it in my palm. It felt impossibly fragile. "This is for a little girl named Leela. She's turning 7 tomorrow. I've been gone for 6 weeks. The longest I've ever been away. She writes me letters. Her handwriting is still messy, but she's learning so fast. In her last letter, she asked if I would be home for her birthday. I promised her I would. I promised her I would bring her a song in a box. She has never seen a music box before. The idea of it is pure magic to her." I looked Mr. Henderson straight in the eye. The coldness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. He was starting to see. He wasn't looking at a scruffy backpacker anymore. "So you see," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, though it carried through the now silent terminal, "you didn't just deny me entry. You didn't just rip up a travel document. You told 157 children that the world has forgotten them again. You broke a promise to a 7-year-old girl who has so little, but who believes in promises with her whole heart. You took my passport, but you don't understand what my real passport is. My real passport is the trust of that village. It's the sound of those children learning to read. It's the hope in their eyes. And you have no idea. No idea at all. What you have just tried to take from them. I finished, my chest heaving. The silence that followed was profound. It was broken only by a soft sniffle from an elderly woman in the line behind me. Miss Albright stared at me, her professional mask completely gone, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound empathy. She looked at the ruined passport, then at the simple music box in my hand, and then back at my face. She turned to Mr. Henderson. Her voice was ice. "John, go to the staff room. Now. Don't speak to another passenger." He scurried away like a chastened dog, his face ashen. He didn't look back. Ms. Albright knelt down beside me, her voice now incredibly soft. "Miss Vance, Elara, I am so sorry. I cannot begin to express how sorry I am. I have to get home," I whispered, the fight draining out of me, leaving only the deep ache of loss. "I have to get to Leela, okay?" she said, her tone firm and decisive. "Okay, we're going to fix this. I don't know how yet, but we're going to fix this." She pulled out her phone. "First, do you have any other form of ID? A driver's license? Anything with your photo?" I nodded numbly, fumbling in my wallet. "Good. And do you have photos on your phone? Of the school? Of the children? Of Leela?" My hands were still shaking, but I managed to unlock my phone. I opened my photo gallery. It was a sea of smiling, dusty faces. Children crowded around a chalkboard. A group of girls proudly holding up their notebooks. A grainy video of the whole school singing a song they'd written. And there, a close-up of a little girl with big, dark eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "Leela." I handed the phone to Miss Albright. She scrolled through the pictures, her expression shifting from sympathy to awe. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "You've built something incredible. It's their home," I corrected gently. "I just helped lay some of the stones." For the next hour, Miss Albright was a whirlwind of focused energy. She got me a cup of hot, sweet tea and a quiet place to sit away from the prying eyes of the other passengers, who were now being processed by a different, much gentler agent. She was on her phone constantly, her voice a low, urgent murmur. I heard snippets of her conversations. Unacceptable employee conduct. Humanitarian worker. Founder of an aid organization. Yes, I have visual confirmation. We have a moral obligation. She was talking to airline executives, to airport security, to someone at the Saranayan consulate. She was fighting for me. A stranger was fighting for me with more ferocity than I could have ever mustered for myself. She came back to me an hour before the flight's final departure time. "Okay, Elara," she said, crouching in front of me again. "Here's the situation. The consulate has agreed to issue an emergency travel waiver via email, based on your visa records and my testimony. It's highly irregular, but the consul knows of your work," he said, and I quote, "Elara Vance is more Saranayan than half the people in our government. It will serve as a one-time entry document. It's not a passport, but it will get you home." Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. "Really? Really?" she confirmed with a smile. "We're holding the plane. You're going to make your flight." She paused, her expression turning serious. "As for what our employee did, there will be a full investigation. His actions were inexcusable and do not reflect our company's values. I promise you, this will be handled. But right now, our only priority is getting you home." She walked me to the gate herself, past the rest of the waiting passengers. As I walked, something amazing happened. People looked up from their books and phones. The businessman who had looked impatient before gave me a small, respectful nod. The elderly woman who had sniffled reached out and squeezed my arm as I passed. "God bless you, dear," she whispered. A young backpacker gave me a thumbs up. They had heard my story. For a fleeting moment, in the anonymous chaos of an international airport, we weren't just a crowd. We were a community.ms. Albright handed my boarding pass and the printed email from the consulate to the new gate agent. She scanned it, smiled warmly at me, and said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Vance. Have a safe flight home." As I stepped through the gate, Miss Albright stopped me one last time. "Ilara," she said. "Thank you." I was confused. "For what?" "You did everything. Thank you for reminding me what's important," she said simply. "Sometimes we forget in this job. We see so many documents, we forget about the people holding them." I walked down the jet bridge, my heart a confusing mix of gratitude, lingering hurt, and overwhelming relief. I found my seat by the window and sank into it, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical force. As the plane taxied away from the terminal, I looked out at the sprawling airport, at the thousands of people rushing to their own destinations, each with a story I would never know. The flight was long. I didn't sleep. I just held my backpack on my lap, my hand resting on the spot where the music box was tucked away. I thought about Mr. Henderson. I didn't feel anger towards him anymore, just a profound sadness. He lived in a world of rigid rules and harsh judgments, a world so small he couldn't see the humanity in front of him. I hoped for his sake that he would one day learn to see it. When the plane finally began its descent, I pressed my face to the window. The landscape below was achingly familiar. The patchwork of greens and browns, the winding ribbon of the river, the signature red dust that seemed to coat everything in a fine, warm powder. My breath fogged the glass. I was home. The moment the cabin door opened, the air hit me. It was thick, warm, and smelled of damp earth, charcoal fires, and something indefinably sweet. It was the smell of Serenia. It was the smell of my life. I was one of the last people off the plane. As I walked into the small, bustling arrivals hall, I saw him. Cale, my co-founder and dearest friend, was waiting just past the customs line, his tall, lean frame easy to spot. His usually serious face broke into a wide grin when he saw me. I cleared customs with the emergency waiver, the official barely glancing at it after seeing my name. "Welcome home, Ilara," he said with a warm smile. The moment I was through, Cale enveloped me in a huge hug, lifting me off the ground. "You made it," he breathed into my hair. "We were so worried. Your messages stopped. It's a long story," I said, my voice thick with emotion as I hugged him back tightly. "A very long story. You can tell me in the truck," he said, taking my heavy backpack. "The children have been asking about you every 5 minutes. Leela has refused to start her birthday celebration until you arrive." My heart swelled. The drive to Myron was bumpy and dusty. With every mile, the tension and trauma of the airport faded, replaced by the comforting rhythms of the land I loved. We passed women carrying water jugs on their heads, men guiding cattle along the roadside, and children who waved frantically as our old truck rumbled past. When we finally pulled up to the school, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The entire village seemed to be waiting. As soon as I stepped out of the truck, a cheer went up. "Ilara, she's here!" And then they were all around me, small bodies crashing into my legs, little hands grabbing for mine. I knelt down, laughing and crying at the same time, trying to hug them all at once. Their faces, so full of unabashed joy, were the most beautiful sight in the world. Then, the crowd of children parted, and Leela stood there. She was wearing a new dress, a bright yellow one that made her shine. She looked at me, her big eyes searching my face, as if to make sure I was real, I slowly walked towards her and knelt down so we were at eye level. "Happy birthday, my sweet Leela," I whispered. She didn't say anything. She just launched herself into my arms, her small body trembling with emotion. I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I promised I'd be here," I said softly. Against her cheek, she finally pulled back, her eyes shining. "My song?" she asked in a tiny voice. I smiled, my own eyes blurring with fresh tears. I reached into my backpack, my fingers closing around the smooth wood of the music box. I pulled it out and placed it in her small, outstretched hands. "I promised you a song in a box," I said. "Here it is." She looked at it with reverence, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "How does it work?" I showed her the small crank. On the side, she turned it carefully, her tongue sticking out in concentration. And then, the music began. The simple, gentle melody tinkled out into the quiet evening air. It was a song as pretty as the river. Leela's face was a study in pure wonder. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, the gap-toothed grin I had seen in 1,000 photos, and held in my heart for 6 long weeks. The other children gathered around, their faces full of the same awe. In that moment, standing in the red dust of Serenia, surrounded by the children who were my family, listening to the magical little song, I knew what was real. A passport is just paper. A visa is just a stamp. They are keys, but they are not the door. My identity wasn't in that little booklet that a bitter man had torn. My identity was here. It was in the feel of Leela's hand in mine, in the sound of children's laughter, in the foundation of a school built on love and trust. He couldn't rip that. No one could.